And also thank you to the DEC Steering Committee Co-Chair, Megan D., for providing this platform, the opportunity as well as the platform to have the conversation today. So thanks to them, and thank you again to all of you who are joining us. I want to ask quickly if there were questions about being able to record this session. So I just want to quickly ask if there's anybody who has an issue with us recording this virtual roundtable. Certainly you have the option to keep going. All right, the value of design education during a time of online teaching. It seems like a little bit of a heavy title. But I first want to provide an overview of what we are going to try and cover today, even within an hour, the space of an hour. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background and context for this discussion, and then Penny's going to talk a bit, and then we're going to have some discussion prompts, say a little bit about those. And then we're going to divide everyone who's participating today into breakout rooms for some discussion. And then we'll reconvene into the main session to debrief what those breakout room conversations were about, as well as have an informal time of questions and answers. So we're going to try and stick to this time frame as closely as we can. So just to kind of get started, as I said, provide some context and background for why this virtual roundtable and why now. I am the product of a formal design education, and I have directly benefited from it. I also come from a family of design educators, and so I've grown up with the idea that education is just something that's important, and certainly I believe instinctively that design, in particular design education, falls into that category. But I've also spent a lot of time in the last few months thinking about how I communicate or demonstrate the value of education, because it's changed. It's different now than certainly what I initially signed up for. So yeah, in the midst of the COVID-19 and the transition to online teaching, I've been thinking specifically about not just why it's important, but what the value of it is. I keep coming back to that word value. And as I think about my own contributions, the way I interact with my students, that, as I said, has changed. So how has the value changed is one of the questions we'll be looking at today, or talking about today. And I'm sure, hopefully, some of these questions you all have been experiencing for yourselves. And lastly, I just want to note before we continue to move on that there are definitely many, many resources out there. There are a lot of really great resources available through the Design Educators community site. But today is really focused on not necessarily on like the technical things we can do, or how great we can make our online presentations, but it's really this foundational question of value. And among the many questions that I've been asking myself is, does the absence of in-person teaching change the value of design education fundamentally? Does a virtual format change our value as design educators? And there's an extent to which these are, yes, rhetorical questions. They might in some ways be easy for us to answer, but I think that especially now, because of this change, it is an opportunity to not only reflect on the questions, but then also focus on the foundational pieces of design education that we can hold fast to regardless of where we're teaching or the context in which we're teaching. We cannot recreate in-person experiences online. I don't think that's necessarily what any of us are trying to do. So again, because we are in a different context, what are the key foundational pieces that still make our interactions with students as design educators valuable? All right, so as we continue sort of moving through some of this background context, we have some poll questions. And these are somewhat subjective, but I think I personally am interested in kind of gauging how others of you feel at this point in time, especially I think most of us are probably done with our semesters, but as you think about where you are now and how the semester has been for you. I'm just curious to get gauge the temperature of the room, so to speak. So the 3 questions are, or I guess statements. I feel confident about the value I bring as a design educator. My institution acknowledges the value that I bring as a design educator. And then lastly, my students see the value in their design education. So that's kind of a tricky one to answer, because we don't actually, unless we talk to our students, we don't necessarily know. But think about this question in terms of things maybe your students have said to you, conversations that you've had with them, how they've responded. And I also just want to add, so some of you might not be design educators, maybe you're in industry, or maybe you're teaching part-time, or maybe you're educators, but you're outside of design. I think these questions can still be applied to whatever area you're coming from. So that's a helpful way to kind of think about that. All right, oops, keep moving here. Oh, there we go. All right. All right, so outcomes. I wanted to make sure that I hit this sort of early on, and then I'll introduce Penny. She's going to speak a little bit. It's important to me that that there is some sort of outcome based on this conversation. I mean, I hope it's meaningful. I know that it's meaningful for me when I have the opportunity to talk to other design educators. So that is certainly something that I hope that you all get out of this, but I'm also looking for something somewhat tangible that we can point to as a result of these conversations. So in conversation with Penny and the folks of the DEC, we're using the language of a manifesto that advocates for the value of the work that we do, and that, you know, whether we are teaching online or in person. But some additional outcomes could include best practices, a survey for students, or a public service announcement for students, or even identifying some curricular obstacles that we share. But first and foremost, I think we'd like to take the outcomes of today, or the outcomes of the conversation today, and put them into some sort of formalized language that we can all use, that's useful to us in some way. I don't want this conversation to simply just sort of disappear into the internet somewhere. I want there to be some, as I said, things that we can, something useful to come out of this conversation. All right. Just double checking to make sure I covered all the key pieces here. All right, so I now want to introduce Penina Acayo Laker, who is a friend and collaborator of mine. We've actually known each other for over 10 years. We've known each other for over 10 years now. And when I was thinking about this roundtable, virtual roundtable, and kind of the discussion that I was hoping we would have, Penina automatically came to mind, because so she's I guess I should say formally that she's a graphic designer. She's a researcher and assistant professor of communication design at Washington University in St. Louis. Her research and creative practice explore how design research methodologies catalyze constructive solutions in response to complex social challenges facing communities in St. Louis and Uganda. So she's doing a lot of great work at WashU, but as I said, I thought of her immediately because much of her teaching and research is community-based. And I thought it might be helpful, as we're thinking about these larger questions about the value that we are bringing as design educators, to hear her talk a little bit about how she's experienced teaching in the midst of COVID-19 as a way to help us prepare for the conversation, but also think about those skills and contributions, like the skills that we're helping students develop, and the contributions we're making and the contributions students are making, even with the limitations that we're now working within. So Penny, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Anne. And it's really great to see so many familiar faces here today. I'm seeing a few of my colleagues too at WashU, so shout out to them. I'm really excited to just finally be able to continue to wrestle with some of these questions. Anne and I have been talking through with a few of our colleagues with a larger audience of educators, because I'm hopeful that there's some common themes that are going to come to the forefront that we can all relate to. For me, one of the larger questions, especially regarding community-based work, has sort of been this idea of whether it's even possible to still create meaningful work during a time of online instruction. A lot of the classes I teach really rely on that in-person interaction with our community partners, and the sites that we work in, students are engaging different senses of touch, smell, they're observing, they're seeing, they're using their hands, they're gaining empathy by being on site. And once we had to shift to online instruction, I actually got a lot of emails from my students just kind of lamenting and sort of weeping for the loss of opportunity, because up until that time when school was sort of closed, we had been preparing ourselves to get on site with our partners. So they'd spent a significant amount of the semester engaging in learning about how to engage meaningfully. We'd talked about various research methodologies. We'd sort of really prepared, and we were now ready to sort of go in and sort of do and experience and make. This is really why students sign up for these classes, because these are one of the few classes where they actually get to have that like real world experience. And so a lot of these emails sort of were anywhere from oh yeah, we understand, things are not going to be the same, to like, oh, I feel so disappointed, that I won't actually, be able to do this one thing I've been looking forward to all semester. How am I going to sort of feel like the work I create in this class is still valuable or helpful to our partners? And as I saw these emails coming in, I started really to wrestle with this idea and started asking of myself, is it really possible that even as we shift online, that we can sort of have outcomes that will let my students walk away feeling fulfilled? And it was really interesting, because I had to sort of shift my thinking from, okay, so the in-person engagements are no longer going to happen. What can we do sort of in a more remote sense? And my students sort of shifted to developing and writing case studies for our partners that articulated the work that they do and tried to capture how they're adapting during this time of COVID-19. So that meant that whereas we were not in the field, we were engaging a lot of content that was available in the public domain for our partners, which in some ways was also great, because then we're able to see the gaps where in storytelling our partners sort of were lacking. So I think in sort of doing that, my students slowly started sort of reconcile with this idea of, yeah, perhaps there is still value in us being able to support our partners from afar, that things might not look the same anymore, but that they are really struggling with like real-time issues, whether they're financial or capacity and staff-based. And next slide. And I started to engage with some of our partners, and they started to relate to me that more than ever, they were worried that they were not going to feel valued or needed anymore, because higher ed is going through a tough time itself, and they knew that they were no longer going to be a priority for us like they had been in the past. And I started to get the sense that they wanted to maintain that connection with us. So more than anything, I knew that in this time as educators, we need to support our partners in the community, that we need to harness those relationships and sort of weather the times together, because when we come out of this on the other side, I knew that there was going to be like a much stronger connection with our partners. So that also sort of led me to think about, and next slide, think about how do we adjust our expectations and avoid over-promising experiences that we can deliver. So for my students, I had to mentally prepare them to shift completely. Like, we're not going to engage whatsoever. Like, don't expect to engage in person with our partners anymore, because they have a lot of their plates already. We're going to engage secondary content, develop these case studies, and find value in that. And I think for me, doing that, it sort of like took a little bit of pressure away from me to try and like replicate some of these experiences online, give my partners the grace and the space to deal with what they had to deal with, and also allowed my students the space to just like sort of think differently about the value that they bring. Now, in the meantime, behind the scenes, I was actually engaging with my partners to see if there were ways that we could engage virtually with the students without telling the students, so that whenever, if this was going to happen, that to be sort of like this like nice surprise for the students. But also more specifically in terms of expectations, it's important that in such times that in as much as we want to do good work and our students want to engage with community and they want to support and work together through this time, that we realize we're not in the business of trying to solve the problems of our partners. COVID-19 has brought to light so many blatant injustices that have been in a lot of our systems for a very long time. And for a city like St. Louis, you know, within like a less than a 1 mile radius from the university, which is like this beautiful, prestigious place, it's very clear you can see all the root causes of a lot of these issues that stem from these injustices. So we see displacement, we see vacant housing, we see food deserts and everything. So it's there, it's blatant. But it's important to remember that whereas these have been amplified and people now see them, and our students feel like, oh my goodness, you know, we've been talking about these things in class, but now we see them, you know, people are actually like dying and the numbers are sort of astronomical, you know, that we remember we're not trying to overpromise and get our partners excited and not deliver, that there are genuine limitations to online learning that are making everything so much harder to do, that even the time frame of getting feedback from an email looks different in that setting. So I knew that these were really, really important things for me to keep in mind, that both on the partner side and on the student side, that we really like lower the bar so that we're just like, you know, slowly like sort of surpassing those expectations. Next slide, Anne. And at the same time, I have found that there's a great opportunity for us now to more than ever like articulate what that ask is, that when we have partners that we work with in the classroom, they're coming with very specific asks that are real time, that our partners right now, for a lot of them, because they're sort of facing such financial hardship, are trying to better position themselves to compete for grant funding. They're trying to find ways to tell their stories differently. So for my students, it might mean that, yes, we're going to probably forego like developing some really nice, beautiful aesthetic pieces. We're going to probably do a lot more writing. We're going to do a lot more content curation for our partners. We're going to really help them tell their stories and better position themselves to be attractive to their stakeholders and to the larger public. So from a design education perspective, I think there's also like this interesting mindset shift for our students to really think about how designers, you know, whereas we are very equipped to make and package beautiful deliverables, we are really also very capable shining in a way that allows for us to define the intent of the things that we create. So all the behind the scenes work that maybe is not often the one that is celebrated becomes really crucial. So for a lot of my students now, you know, we are thinking about like, how do we write in ways that are compelling? How do we think about storytelling and mediums and tools that we can do that? We're really trying to help our partners sustain their mission and efforts. And the beauty about this too is this timing has really allowed for us to have more tangible and measurable outcomes, because as we create some of these like case studies or stories, our partners are using them immediately, and they're either like, you know, getting funding, or they are reaching a wider base of people, so they're able to report back to us in real time. So we're talking about impact now in class, and we're sort of developing strategies for how to measure impact and really see the value of what we bring to the table. And the last slide, I think the timing is prime for us educators to engage our students in these conversations around equity, inclusion, diversity, because now we see it, you know, more than ever. I think, you know, for me, like, you know, living in St. Louis, again, like my students will not be able to get that experience from anywhere else. That the value we bring by being located in a city like St. Louis will provide opportunities for us to wrestle with those really hard conversations and be able to actually now see them while our partners are going through these struggles. And there's a sense of really satisfaction that I think can come from that. So it's not easy. I think there's so much value that we bring, especially I feel like with community-based work, we're sort of at a time where we can now really start to see that value maybe a little bit more clearly with some of our like core offerings. But I think even for some of the core classes that we teach, whether it's like intertypography or word and image, that we're able to in this time to think about ways that we can start to include some core projects around socially engaged practice, even for students at that level, that even as they're sort of learning the basic principles of design and developing, whether it's like posters or whatever deliverables, that the content can now tap into sort of like this time that we're in and allow for them to still engage with some of these issues while they learn some of those basic principles. So yes, I you know, just like a few things that I've been wrestling with that I've been sort of talking through with Anne, and hopefully they spark some larger conversation as we move into the next section. So
thank you, Penny. So as we think about the variety of challenges, and Penny has named a few of them, the challenges that we face, I also want us to think about the uniqueness of the experiences that we're facilitating. And these two questions have come up in some of the conversations I've had with other educators. And so these are serving as the design prompt or the discussion prompts for the breakout sessions. So I'm going to go over them now, but they will be, once you're divided into your breakout rooms, they will be broadcast into the breakout rooms, so you'll be able to reference them again. And I'll be giving some specific instructions about the breakout rooms in a minute. But the key questions that I would like us all to have to think about and respond to today, the first one is, what value do we provide as design educators? It sounds pretty basic, but again, I think given the circumstances that we're in right now with some of the limitations that we're facing, that what are the foundational pieces that we provide as design educators, and how do we measure or demonstrate that value, whether that's to ourselves, whether that's to our students, whether that's to our institutions, but this question of value. And then secondly, we know that we can't recreate in-person experiences online. So what are some reasonable expectations to set for ourselves or for our students? And just on a side note, make sure that you are using the chat to help us capture your ideas, whether that's in the breakout rooms or in the main session. But so, yeah, these two kind of key questions, they're different in nature, but they are still part of this larger conversation about what it is that we provide for students as part of their design education experience. The breakout room. So you will be randomly assigned to a breakout room. And if you want to record your breakout room session, I think we'll be able to do that, assuming that everyone in the group consents. So make sure that there's agreement about that. This would also be a good opportunity to introduce yourself if you're in a breakout room with people that you don't know. Designate a note taker. Since I'm guessing most of you are design educators, this should be an easy one for us. But you're still, even if you have somebody who's officially like taking notes for your group, you're still encouraged to use the chats. The discussion prompts. In your breakout rooms, you can respond to either one or both of the questions. So if you, in your group, would rather respond to the first one or the second one, that's up to you, but certainly you can respond to both. And then at the end of the breakout room session, we'll have one person from each group report back about what you talked about. All right, so I think I'm going to stop screen sharing, and we will yes, go to our breakout rooms. It's funny. Hi.
we're back. That went so fast.
I know. Kelly and I were talking. If it was probably not enough time, never enough time, but the clock beckons. So I think we've got just about everybody back. All right. So I'm just going to, in order to sort of debrief about, because I'm really curious to hear what everybody talked about. Just to have one person from each group, and just go ahead and unmute yourself and tell us a little bit. Yeah, this could be a half-a-day conference. Absolutely, it could be. To just unmute yourself and jump in and tell us a little bit about what you talked about in your your group? Whoever's brave enough to go first.
I can go.
No, Megan, you go. Megan, you go.
All right, I'll try to go quick. We have a lot. So for as far as just general thinking or being aware of their mental, physical, and emotional fatigue and people taking on different things than they were used to. But that value, really thinking about community and impact, what Penny was saying about the community and building those relationships, Michael sort of echoed saying they've done some projects with local businesses, which really builds back into teaching students empathy, seeing what other people are going through. Other things they were saying were focusing on the ability to communicate well. As far as expectations go, big thing, so Carl is working on a publication right now, actually, has surveyed a bunch of students, so ask the students what they're hoping to get out of this, what that value is, and thinking more about real world applications. Right now, as horrible as this all is, impact really does seem greater. So, and how do we do this equitably? Thinking about food access, internet access, software, computer, those sorts of things.
That's a big one. Thank you. So I'm curious to know how many of you, just an informal raising of hands, like have like surveyed your students or asked your students, like checked in with them at the end of the semester about like how the semester went. I'm curious if, yeah, I did too. Okay. All right, next group.
So echoing what Megan had just said, that there were some of the conversations that we had similarly as well. One of the discussions we got into was measuring success as an educator, and we talked about how the industry has shifted, and that a lot of between UX and analytics and whatnot, there's a lot of graphic design traditionally hasn't been something that was quantifiable, and now it has become more quantifiable. So there's an industry change that's happening, and I think as educators. But in terms of creating communities, a really big part, I think, of having the in-person experience. I think that there's more depth to it when it's a in-person community. Creating and facilitating experiences and communities is a big part of what we do as educators. And modeling behavior, showing them as we're talking with other students. I think that that's something that one of the people in the group who talked about was that I should say me, our group thinks that having a person, the instructor leading, showing students how interactions are possible with whether it's clients or collaborators or whatever. I think having that modeling is really important. Having that in-person experience to show that modeling is vital. So. Oh, and the last thing is one-on-one feedback. We talked a little bit about how you can go online and MyLinda and YouTube and watch all sorts of videos. You get the technical experience. You can learn about kerning and lighting and stuff and different things, UX research methodologies. But in terms of that one-on-one feedback, is something that really can help elevate a good designer into a great designer. So.
Agreed. Awesome. All right, who's next?
I can share back a little bit, and then Tiffany, filling the gaps for a lot of some of the things that have been talked about. Some of the things that came out from the value that we bring that was sort of interesting, were this idea that for a lot of design programs we tend to be, and I think it's the language of gatekeepers, sort of the gateway for a lot as they sort of navigate their way through their academic career. That so we find ourselves playing this role of not just mentorship, but like Jen mentioned, we're like often like having to like counsel students, you know, we're dealing with a lot of different issues, you know, for especially those in institutions that have students that are first generation. Or non-traditional in the sense, you're sort of like in that business of like sort of like mentoring them and working them through life issues that you're not always necessarily equipped to do. But we're also really good about talking about the value we bring and what we do really well internally And so from a storytelling perspective, I think especially in such times with higher ed going through whatever we're going through, we need to get a little bit more bold about how we articulate and tell, articulate the value of what we bring, but also like really thinking about how we can then prepare our students to do the same. So I think that's like a place that we could get better. We're also really good at, humanizing a lot of content, where there's like, data, information, and in such times, especially like there's so much content with COVID-19 that we could really start to tap into that could really help us really shine in that way. In a little bit, I guess on the second question, a little bit, we talked about how we can really start to get a little bit more like clear in the kinds of structure, the kinds of work, like we're not giving students busy work per se, that we're really being intentional with what counts, that we're giving students exactly, having them turn their efforts towards areas that really, really count, and helping them think through that, not just keeping them busy. And with grading too, we talked about how, like, I think there's this opportunity to think about how we can redistribute and reward maybe different areas that, like engagement, participation, that could really be a way to lessen the burden of like, oh my goodness, grades. We can't take away grades like we would love to, because not all of us, we can't really do that. But how can we articulate to our students and reward their presence? Because even just like by being present with everything that's going on, that's a win. That they're showing up. That's huge. How could we talk about? So there's a lot I probably haven't. I'm probably missing. Tiffany, do you hear anything there that anyone from the group?
You were very comprehensive.
You're too kind.
I don't have to be like, oh, you forgot everything, Penny. You covered it.
Hi, Tiffany. All right, who's next?
I'd be happy to talk for our group.
Excellent.
We talked about the value of design education to administrators, or to the university or the institution. And how do you measure that? That's what Karen was mentioning in the notes there. And of course, data is the way that we measure that. And if we're all sort of, our value as educators is for teaching and service and research, that measuring teaching, although maybe problematic, there are ways to value the teaching or the data of how many students, and student evaluations, again, problematic, but maybe still data. Research dollars, and I think many of us probably don't necessarily have an expectation of research dollars. And then there's service, and that's what we do a lot of, right? The value of the service, and how do you measure that? And one of the ways that our institution has just sort of come up with and is still practicing with is sort of the number of service hours and then the impact of that. So can you take the number of service hours, 20 hours a month, times the level of impact, maybe between 1 and 5, 5 being an essential critical factor for the success of the department or the students, and 1 being sort of volunteer time, and being able to come out with a number for that to make it measurable.
Yeah, at CSU, there's some like initial conversations about that very question related to service, because a lot of the things we're talking about, like counseling, mentoring, and other pieces of service related to our teaching and research, are still really important. And can we come up with a language that can be measured, or a way that can be measured? So those of us who are going up for tenure or going up for full, that those are, that they can be counted in some way.
Exactly.
Interesting. All right. Do we have more groups? I think there were 6 breakout groups, right?
Yeah, we had a group, and I took notes, so if other folks in my group want to chime in. So we talked, similar to some ideas that have already been shared, about measuring student interest via surveys before and after they've left a course. So, looking at what, how that value has increased throughout their time and experience in a course. And better mechanisms for checking in and following alumni throughout their career, whether it's design related or not. As we know, a lot of our students may shift career paths along the way. Have students engage in closer connections with their community, and consider how we frame to our students their exposure to these communities, and then teaching them how to find opportunities rather than waiting for those opportunities to kind of jump in their lap. How do they go out and get those? And then back to kind of the alumni, like how do we, best use our alumni in connecting with current students? I know one thing that we just initiated this year with some prolific alumni from our program is a graphic design advisory board. So we have like 4 alumni that own studios in the Chicago area, and we're collaborating with them to engage our current students in meaningful ways. So I think there are alumni out there that want to engage with education and students, and think making these things happen and taking advantages of those opportunities is always good.
Great. So I just want to recognize we've hit 2 o'clock. I would like to make sure we hear back from every group, but I understand if some of you have other commitments and need to jump off. Thank you again. There will be follow-up. I won't let this, as I said, float away into the internet. But I just want to make sure we hear back from every group. So who have we not heard from yet? Did we get everybody? Oh, I hear some. Oh, go ahead.
Hi. I was in a group which we forgot to take notes, but I remember some of the talking points. We chose to focus on the expectations for students when we had to go online, but we're talking from the perspective of we had to go online like through a crisis, so it's going to be different when we plan for actually teaching during fall if we have to do it online. So mostly we talk about how the expectations were very flexible during the crisis teaching, but then thinking and preparing for the fall or even for the summer, we discussed how it's going to be really important that expectations are set up from the very beginning. They might be different expectations from what we usually do in a face-to-face semester, but still we want to make sure that the students get what we said, what they are expecting to get from their education, what they pay for. So it's going to be like syllabus change in the sense that this is kind of the version of the syllabus for the class being taught face-to-face. And then we also discuss very practical sort of issues of classes that rely heavily on printing and comparing stuff on print, and how difficult this was to address for a lot of professors. We didn't have time to come up with the best solution, but it seems to be one point that is very difficult to give that sort of experience to students. I think that's all I remember. If anyone in my group remembers anything else, please jump in.
Anyone?
That was great. Thanks, Camila.
Okay. All right. So any other, I think we got every group, I think. Speak now, forever hold your peace. All right. So again, in interest of time, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone, including members of the DEC steering committee, my friend Penny also, and all those of you who joined us today. I can't wait to read through some of the comments that have been in the chat. And yes, I think Kelly put a note in the chat to send me your any notes that you took, send them to me via email. So thank you again for a great conversation, and hopefully we'll have something that's tangible as an outcome from today's virtual roundtable. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Anne and Penny, for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks very much, Anne and Penny. Hugely.
Oh, nice to see you,
Good to
Michael.
see you, Michael.
Nice to see you, Anne and Penny. Hey, hopefully there's going to be an AIGA DEC conference sometime in the future, and we'll all see each other then and compare notes.
Possible. Yeah, sounds awesome.
Get those dialectic articles ready.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely,
Pleasure.
definitely.
Thank you, Walker. Nice to meet you.
Way to go, Anne and Penny.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jordan.
I'm gonna stop recording.
That was awesome.